In this talk, we'll be looking at the fundamentals of Adobe InDesign, which is the industry standard when it comes to desktop publishing. And it will be one of those list of programs that if you know how to use, you will be very employable when you want to do your part one. Has anyone heard of Quark Express?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the Adobe version. Everyone's switching over to this one just because it's got greater integration with Adobe's other products, Photoshop, Illustrator, etc. So I learned how to use InDesign about a week when I started my diploma in another school of architecture, and it completely changed the way I kind of outputted my layouts and my drawings and etc. etc. So what we're going to do is just kind of give you a brief overview of some sort of like technical things really to sort of help you sort of compose drawings, how to do like, you know, just various things, and then have it for PDF output, which then you can put on any computer.
Basically 10 really basic things to get you up and running using the programs, 10 fundamentals that you need to know. And then from there you can go and play around with more advanced stuff afterwards.
We're going to assume for this tutorial, lecture, whatever, that most of you, if not any of you, have actually used InDesign before, so we'll start from scratch really. Okay, let's roll.
Right, starting a new document.
So is this me? Okay, so when you come into InDesign, you'll have the kind of what's happened there? Okay, so this is the kind of dialog box you get. You can get rid of it. Let's create a new document. So here's your kind of standard layout. For the purposes of this, let's make it a A3 landscape. Two things you might want to have a look at. Margins are kind of, you can set your margins, but I tend to just put 10 and then 10. If you go to more options, you'll see these things called bleed and slug. Bleed is basically when you have a full page spread, so this is quite handy. So if you're looking at these boards here, that is a full bleed image, right? And what bleed allows you to do is it gives you a tolerance which you can then set, which basically means when you've printed it out the printer, you're sending it off to print. When it trims, you're left with the picture and not an awful white stripe where your image would have gone at full size, but because the printing tolerance couldn't happen. So just as good practice, I tend to put 3 mil all around. Slug you can ignore, it's basically printer's instructions outside the bleed area. Facing pages, we'll come to the page dialog box in a bit, but facing pages means like a normal book, you have the left page and your right page. If you unclick that, then everything you click as a layout will be just underneath one another rather than as pages, but we'll get to that. So create a new document. And there we go. So here's your document size at A3, there's your 10 mil margin, and then the red line is your 3 mil bleed around it. Okay? One of the most handy keyboard shortcuts you're going to use is W. You hit W, it gives you a preview of what it's actually going to look like when you print it out for output. On the right here, you've got all these kind of standard tools, but we've got also these kind of useful dialog boxes. So these are your pages. So as you can see, if you lay them out like a book, if I was to add one as like a book, you can see how then it kind of progresses like you would in a book. So whenever you're using InDesign, think about how you actually do things if you're laying it physically as a book or another document or a magazine or whatever. So that's it. Should we just move on to the next one? Just so you know, this whole presentation was also created in InDesign. So yeah.
Right, next we're just going to look at, having made that document, how you can start putting stuff in really simply. So if we go back to InDesign. Basically, the easiest way to add stuff is to place images. You can place images in basically any format. So you can place JPEGs, both direct Photoshop files, Illustrator files, that will handle most formats. So to do that, you go to the File menu and you go to Place. And that comes up with a window, so you can select your file. So if I just go into my desktop, InDesign folder, just find a random image or something.
How about loud?
Images. We don't want some of our food now. Apples. So select your image and click open. Now you see how I've got this pointer with a kind of little thumbnail of the image. That's telling me that's what it's going to place. Now to place it, you need to draw a not text frame, an image frame. So you basically just drag the mouse.
Which is this thing here in the toolbar.
But just going from place, you just drag with the mouse, just a random size. Now you see it's coming very small. InDesign will always place the images at the size of the image. So the actual dimensions of the image. So in this case, this image is a really tiny image. And it's only taking up that size of the frame. So this blue box, you need to think of the blue box as basically like a picture frame. And you can size that independently of the image. So if I make that smaller, it makes the image really small. So if I just do another one, let's find a bigger image. So again, same thing. I've got this kind of loaded cursor, so it shows me what it's about to place. So I'll just place this on this page. So I drag the box. There we go, that's a bit bigger. What's really useful with working should have a little menu.
Maybe if you go back to trying to find these icons which allow you to do certain things with the images. Yeah.
It's under one of the sub menus in window.
Is it?
If you're looking for a line.
Fitting images to frame. For some reason the icons aren't there. Not really ready to work.
Normally, when you have a frame, you get 4 little icons up here, which allow you really quickly to fit content to the frame. Another way of doing it is to right-click, go down to Fitting, and you get these options. So you can fit content to frame, which will fit it to the size of the frame. And doing that just stretches the image to fit the frame.
Notice when Lydon does this dialog here actually gives you the physical size of the frame. So if you want to manually adjust it to a particular dimension, you can do so. Now we've obviously set millimeters, but in preferences you can do centimeters, inches, picas, pixels, whatever you need it for really. But the good default is obviously mil.
If I undo that, look at none of those fitting options. You can do fit frame to content, which is pretty useful. So if you're that means whatever size the image is, it'll fit frame to it. If I undo that again, another useful one is the proportional one. So fit content proportionally. So that it'll try and fill the frame as best it can, but because the image isn't quite the same proportions as the frame, it's only able to fit it to the bottom. Now, one last thing while we're on frames, it's really useful just to remember that it is a frame. So if you don't want to have the whole of this image, you can bring the frame in like that, just like that part of the image. And doing that, it's not editing the image in any way whatsoever. It's just like a mask over the top of it.
Just let me do something. And if for example, say, oh God, say for example, I want the picture to take up the entire frame. Now you know you've got a good res of thing, but it won't fill up the entire frame. If you go to your direct selection tool, so this is your selection tool, this is your direct selection tool. They're two different things. You go to your direct selection tool. See, I've selected everything within that frame, the actual picture. So now I can resize this to how big I want. So this is useful if you just want to show detail or just a particular part of the image. And no matter where you kind of move it, it will never kind of go beyond the frame. So that's how you can manually resize if it all goes horribly wrong.
Yeah. So that's basically the introduction to placing things and using frames. The next thing, which Jay, do you want to get into text? Placing text. One of the best things about InDesign is working with text and images at the same time. So it's really good for things like doing your portfolio, doing dissertations where you might have text and images together. So what we'll do is, here's a text tool. What we'll do is we'll just put a box where we want the text to roughly go, right? And then, so that's where your text is going. Now, if you prepared a piece of text to say Word or RTF or whatever, what you can then do is then place the text literally into the document. So, so you go to File, Place. You got to stop whatever that thing is. Go File, Place again. This is my draft of my dissertation. So you just select it again.
Wow.
That's a good example. You've got to be really careful when you place things, because see this? It's always worth having show import options turned on, and to make sure it doesn't replace the selected item, which is what just happened, and it automatically put it into that text box. So if when you're placing a file direct from Word, it's always worth having show import options turned on. So that when you go open, it basically gives you this menu about how you want to import the text. So if it's got contents, you can tell it to include that or not. Let's turn the footnotes off. We don't want those right now. You can either keep the formatting that you had in the Word document, in which case you tick this, or you can move it, this, say OK. And now, again, it's giving us that same kind of loaded cursor where it's sort of showing a preview of what it wants to place.
There we go.
So there's the text in that box.
So obviously having, okay, you can then change the text options to whatever you want, but let's say for example that this looks, if we zoom in on this, this looks a little bit too, this doesn't look, it's not particularly easy to read in a single column. So what we'll do is, okay, so if you go into, so here's your text options, but if you go into your paragraph formatting controls, there should be an option in there, but for some reason Martin's thing isn't playing ball. basically what allows you to do is you can just click a little icon box and then it will allow you to do multiple columns. So in the click of one click you can have 2 columns rather than 1 if it makes it easier to read. But because for some reason Lydon's dialog box is being a bit weird today, we'll just quick kind of manually do it. So so we'll just kind of right, so there you go. This is so there you go. It's now resized it completely automatically, so you now have 2 columns of text.
Where was that?
That was in your
in the
text dialog
options, which you can get by doing Control V or Apple V. It's also somewhere in time. These other menus.
Object.
Yeah, text frame options. So that's how you get your columns.
Yeah, you know, a lot of these columns, there's a lot of icons on the top which for some reason aren't displaying, but we're just going to have to press on it. So, use quick talk about it.
Yeah, what you'll notice here, my dissertation is about 10,000 words long, and it can't all fit in this text frame. So whenever you have a text frame that's got this red plus down here, it means there's text that can't fit in, and they call that overset text, so it's sort of text that's falling outside the frame. Now what you can do is if you click on this plus, if you click on that, it then gives you an option to draw another text box. And then the text will flow into that text box. And you can see again, it's overset again, so you can click it again.
Well, mine will be the same for a bar.
Then draw another box, etc., etc. Yeah,
Yeah, so
because it links, it will flow from text box to text box to text box. More detail on that?
no, I think we should press on.
Yeah. Yeah, you can set out your text boxes beforehand and you can link it together, and then you can flow your text in and it will automatically flow all the way down. And any time you adjust one of the text boxes, it will automatically fit the text.
What if you want to lock the text, like obviously you don't want 2 paragraphs, like 1 paragraph split over 2 pages. What if you want to like lock?
So you draw another text box on the next page, and then you physically resize the text box, and then you overset, and then it automatically jumps to the next page.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, master pages.
Master pages,
Yeah. So, master pages are useful if you have a lot of consistent things in your text, in your documents. Things like your page number, consistent titles, or whatever. Master pages you can find up in your dialog box, and they are. So this is your document as you have it, but then these are your master pages. So if you click on your master page, it will take you to the master page box. And let's say, for example, just to make this really obvious, we want to put in our current page number, which usually goes here or wherever you want. So what we'll do is we'll just put in a page number. And if you go into type, and you go into special character and then symbols, markers, you can then put in your current page number, which is really handy. So let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just make this absolutely massive. So there's your page number for that one, and then there's your page number for that one. So now when you click on here, you'll find that your page number, I know it's underneath the text, but you'll find that it always appears wherever you put it in the master page. So if you choose to move that, it will automatically move it again with it. So any elements that you change in your master pages will affect the entire document. And obviously, if you want different effects for different sections or whatever, then you set up a new master page.
So a master page is basically like a template. Anything you see on the master page, you will see on all the pages that are using that master as the template.
So as you can see here, just by virtue of adding some new pages, it will automatically page the next numbers. So that means if you're going to, say you've got a sequence but you want to insert something new into the sequence, you can just insert that in as 2 pages, like so. So I want to insert 2 new pages after that one, and it will automatically shuffle everything down. So that's how you do that. I think that's probably all I need to say about master pages for the moment. So.
You know the text, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You know normally when you bring text into a document like this, it just kind of goes to the next page until it runs out of text.
Yeah.
But whereas on this, it will only do that if you give it another box to go to. Is that right?
That is correct.
So how do you get it to do it so that it just kind of does it so that all the text runs out? So then you know that you've written so much text, which is now going to be 30 pages instead of, say, you see what my question is?
Yeah, like it automatically sets it out to say word. It shows you how many.
Exactly. So you type so many words, and then you know the way it's set out at that moment is 16 pages. How do you do it with this?
I'm pretty sure there's a way around it, but because this is a desktop publishing program, I'm sure it will tell you that information, but I tend to just do it manually until it.
So you just keep adding more and more boxes until you're filled.
Basically, yeah.
All right, but then if you say reduce the font, then you'd end up with less of them, wouldn't you? Would it automatically adjust it?
No, you have to delete the pages manually.
All right. Because that's quite a useful thing to be able to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, whether or not they do that, I don't know, because I only know so much about InDesign, but for those purposes, we just manually do it. It doesn't take long.
Right. Next, we're just going to quickly look at character and paragraph styles. And these work quite similar to master pages. So if I'll just make a bit of text.
Notice, by the way, these are all in the same layer. Just like Photoshop and Illustrator and all the other Adobe packages, you can do things in layers. Just because time's against us, we're just doing everything in one layer, but I would recommend anyone to use layer discipline. So when I do documents in InDesign, I have all my images on one layer, all my text on another layer, all my annotations on another layer. So it just makes things really easy when I want to move things around.
So if you just look at the character and paragraph styles, when you have text in a box, if you go to a little character bar down here, you can very easily change the font, change the size. You go to paragraph, you can change the alignment, all that kind of thing very easily. But what you've also got are things called paragraph styles. Now, if we make a new paragraph style down here, and this is basically a template. So if you double click on that, you can edit it. And you can give this paragraph style, you can basically customize it. So what it's really useful for is if you're doing a document where you maybe you've got 3 different types of text. You might have title text, bold, and it's size 24. You might have normal text. Then you might have like caption text, which is font size 8 and in italics or something. So if we just make this a different font, it's really stupid. I'll just leave it at that. And click OK. Now that's changed it. But if I click on that, and in this paragraph menu, I've got these 2 paragraph styles. Now basic paragraph is doing times regular size 12, which is why it's very hard to see on the screen because it's so small. But very quickly, because I've set up this other paragraph style, I can just click on that and it automatically applies all those settings to that text. So that's really useful for if you want to do things like captions and if you want to change a lot of text very, very quickly to whatever setting you have here. So you can set a whole load of these up for like normal text, as I said, caption, headings, that kind of thing. And also what they'll do, if you decide, actually, I don't like that font, I want to change it to something else, but I've got about 20 titles all using that font. All you have to do is change the paragraph style change it once to whatever that is, and then we'll change it for all the, so it changes it here, but we'll change it for everything else that uses the paragraph style. So that's all I'll say on that. The links, this is really, really important, and this is one of the best things about InDesign. If we go back to this image here, which I placed earlier, and select it, we've got this links menu here. Now what the links menu shows you is every single file that you've placed into the document using your file place. And it gives you the file name, and it tells you what page it's on. Now what the link does is, it doesn't embed the image into InDesign. It just tells InDesign where to find the image and what file path, what folder it's in on my computer. Now what that means you can do is you can, what's this image? If I find this image on here, where it was, so that's the image. Now because it's linked, if I modify this image, so if I just put it in Photoshop, I'm just going to change the image. What you'll see it will do, it automatically updates it in InDesign because it's been linked. So that's incredibly useful because it means you can start the document when you haven't got all your final images to see how things might begin to lay out. And you can link the files, but then someone else or you can be carrying on working on them and it will automatically update in the document. So if I go to this image and let's just make it black and white, very simply, and then save it. And then if I go back to my InDesign, you see now in the links palette it's giving me this hazard warning. That's telling me that something's happened to the file. So if I click down here, update link, very simply just updates it, it comes in grey, which is the change I made. So that is really, really useful, so that any change you make to the link, it will then update in the InDesign. Now there's just a few things to be aware with that. If everything's linked, and you go and move the file somewhere else, we make a new folder, InDesign won't know where to find it. So you have to be a little bit careful with your file structure, that you don't go and move the file, otherwise you get missing links and you have to go and relink them.
What you essentially have in InDesign is when it places something in and references something in from somewhere else, it creates a preview image. So if you move the image and InDesign doesn't know where it is, when you print it out, it will print out the preview image and it looks shit. So if you get really crappily pixel pictures, you know why.
But if you need to then relink it for whatever reason, if you double click on it, you can go to relink and then you can find it again. Now, when you have a file with lots and lots of images that have all been linked, say you want to give that, say I do it on my computer, I want to give it to Jay. If I just copy the InDesign file itself and give that to Jay on a memory stick, and he opens it, it'll have lost all the links because they're still on my computer. So he'll only get the previews and he won't be able to print it. So to give someone the whole file with all the links, use a thing called package. So if you go to File, Package down here, what it will basically do is it packages the file plus all the links into a little folder, and it makes a copy of all the links. So it's not moving them off the computer, it's making a copy and putting them all tidily into one folder. And it's sort of designed for if you want to send it to a professional printers, which is why you get this thing for printing instructions, which you normally don't bother with. And then it's just asking me where do I want to save the folder. So I can put that on my desktop, save it. And it also copies all the font files, so everything you need to open the document on another computer is there. And it puts it into a folder like that. There's the file, here's the link. So there's that one image that's linked, and there's all the font that's being used in the document. No. Well, you can, but we'll show you a much, much better way, which is PDF output.
So this is really handy, as Grant just pointed out, if you want to give it to a printer like Roy upstairs. PDF, as probably everyone knows now, is pretty much standard output. Thankfully, InDesign does a number of package presets which you can use to advantage. So let's say, for example, we want to export this report as a PDF. So you go to File, and there are these things called Adobe PDF presets, which you can then modify, but the ones that they do are pretty good. So let's say we want to do it for like a proper book or whatever. So we'll just call it test, and we just got to go through the dialog box. So everyone pretty much using Adobe now. The newer version of Adobe Acrobat that you use, the smaller the file size. So, and then if you go through the dialog box, there's various things you can do, like, for example, change the output to RGB if you wanted to do that or whatever. Here's a handy one, which I know a lot of people ask me about, is things like crop marks and bleed marks. If you ever set your crop marks and stuff manually, you don't ever have to ever again. So let's say it's a thing that we just want to sort of cut out a bigger piece of paper. We can add those marks. Hell, why don't we just put all the things there? Export that, and then it will generate the PDF for you. So there's different ones you can do. Press quality is obviously the best quality you can, but obviously this file size goes up. And what this is useful for is that if you have, say, a version which you just want for web output, which needs to be a lot lower in size and quality, then you just go to smallest possible file size and it will automatically do that. So then here you go, here's our PDF of what we've just been doing. So you'll notice here that all the printer's marks on here if you care about what they actually do. So you've got your crop marks, your registration bars, your color bars, and all that kind of thing.
The most useful one is just crop marks, because it means sometimes you send them to print with Meld and they don't always put crop marks on. So you put crop marks on the PDF and it will print those crop marks. And then if you need to guillotine it down, it makes it very easy.
Okay, so I've got a couple of other extra little things. Okay, so there's another couple of things I just want to kind of show you. Just if you're doing any output, and say for example you don't really have any text to do yet, but you want to just see what the page looks like. You don't have any text, so what are you going to do? Well, if you draw a text box and you hit right click, and then you do this thing called fill with placeholder text, it gives you a whole bar of lorem ipsum, which is a kind of, well, it's not a language or anything, it's not real, but all it's there to do is to allow you to see how text is going to look on a particular page. So that's quite a useful one to know. Also, let's say for example you want to add a picture of something. So yeah, that'll do. So I've added this image as a circle, but you want the text to wrap around that. So if you select both of them, where on earth is it? It's on your weird thing again. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna have to forget that one because I'll show you that if anyone wants to know. But basically, if we had the normal dialog box, basically what you could do is basically have the text literally fit around a particular image, and that works for clipping paths in Photoshop as well. So if you have like an image with a predefined clipping path that you've done in Photoshop, you can import that in, and then all the text will wrap around that automatically, which is pretty handy to know. If you guys want to know how to do that, come see me. We'll go through that. But I can't really think of anything else.
A few really like quite a useful little shortcut. If you're quite zoomed in and you want to get back to your page, if you just hit Control, or if you're on a map, you get Apple 0, it fits it to the page. If you hold down Alt at the same time, it fits it to the spread. That's just quite useful when you're zooming in and out to get back to what you see. Also, when you set up,
just Martin's just said the kind of difference between RGB and CMYK.
it's quite important. RGB color is what screens use. It's basically sort of red, green, blue color. And CMYK color is printer's color settings based on the fact that the printer uses 4 types of things: cyan, magenta, yellow, and
Key is black.
yeah. And it'll spray out those 4 colors. And you get this in when you do your PDF export. You normally, one of the options, you can tell it whether you want it RGB or CMYK, and you also get it in Photoshop and Illustrator. I was told by an InDesign sort of specialist who gave us a talk that unless you're sending a document to a professional printers, you should always use RGB color for truer color output. That's because most printers, most cheap printers that you might have at home will have like an automatic adjuster to adjust from RGB to CMYK. So if you print a document that's on CMYK to that, it will still apply the adjuster and modify your colors a bit. So he recommended you should always print in RGB or send to print in RGB, given that those printers will correct it, unless you're sending to some really professional printing service.
So central RGB.
Yeah, so work in RGB mode. So that will give a truer colour representation on screen as well.
I guess we should just sort of field a couple more questions if anyone's got any.
Does that include the art style printing
Sorry?
for RGB colour?
I haven't checked whether they automatically adjust.
You can see the difference between an RGB outputted colour and CMYK. It's quite a visible difference. So if
They possibly don't adjust actually on those plotters. Should check with Roy actually, but it's worth checking because it does make a difference on your colour, even on things like black. If you use the wrong one, your black will sometimes come out looking grey.
Any other questions?
You know, if you're editing text, so you're on the text tool.
Yeah.
Is there a keyboard shortcut to get back to V, the black arrow? Because it always annoys me.
All the Adobe shortcuts are exactly the same. So V is selection tool.
Yeah.
A is the direct selection.
I know what your question is.
Yeah.
It's bloody annoying.
Yeah. If you type in text,
now
there's
it's
no.
like, I don't know.
What's the question? I think like Alt and Enter exits the text.
Maybe. Does it?
Which press B again.
Basically, if you start using Photoshop or any of these Adobe programs, all these tools have a shortcut key, which they give you in brackets when you hover over. So, for example, direct selection tool is A. So it's quite handy starting to learn those. It just means you can jump between tools a lot quicker. So, for example, T is for text, P is a pen tool. It just means you don't always have to go and click.
Yeah, I think learning keyboard shortcuts, the more you get to use it programs, just saves you just hours and hours of time doing stuff. Hopefully in this talk we've kind of showed you some things that will save you time, because I used to do things like manually number pages and things like that. So just a couple of handy things.
Press escape. Seems to work.
there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up. Okay, sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the most important things I find is setting up a grid in InDesign.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, maybe talk through that.
You want to go?
Do you want to tell us how to do it?
So under like layouts, I think. And then create guides.
So yeah, this you can put like, you can use guides. So you can either create this way, so you want 5 rows, 7 columns, and you can tell it whether you want to fit it to the edge of the page or to the margin, and then you can click OK and put some of these guides in. Another way of doing it is to drag a guide out from the ruler bar. So that puts a guide like that. You can drag a horizontal guide. When you drag a horizontal guide, it'll only, you see, it only applies it to that one page. And sometimes you might want it to go across to this side. And if you hold down Control or Apple, it gives you a guide that goes across the whole page. And that's quite useful. So it's really, it's really handy using guides, because it means you can very easily snap, your text box will always try and snap to some of the guides. So it's quite useful to sort of get, if you want sort of consistent pages where you've always got blank space at the top, on your, you can put a guide on your master page, for example. So like dragging this down to the ruler bar, so I want the guide there, and then I can go down to this page and you see the guides showing.
So just as I said earlier, anything you do in your master page, it will apply to all the other pages as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, thanks for coming.